Starting Tier 1, we have Genesis, the beginning of mankind and the world for the three religions. It notably tells the story of Adam and Eve, the first humans created by God, who disobeyed his orders and ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It also contains the stories of Cain and Abel, Noah's Ark, and more. The book of Genesis is well known to those not part of the three religions as well. It is important in all denominations of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Next, we have Adam and Eve, as previously said, the first two humans created by God. God breathed life into Adam, who was created from the dust of the ground, and Eve was then created from his rib to be a companion. Later on, Eve is tempted by the serpent, or Satan, to eat from the tree that we also mentioned. She, along with Adam, eat the fruit of the tree, then they are expelled from the Garden of Eden. This was the original sin and condemned humanity to harder lives, like having pain from childbirth and having to work the land and soil for sustenance to survive. Abraham refers to the figure in the book of Genesis that all three of the religions share. Abraham was chosen by God to leave his homeland and to found a great nation, and in return for being chosen by God, Abraham was asked to follow God faithfully. Famously, Abraham and his wife Sarah had a son, Isaac, though he also had another with a maidservant, Hagar, Ishmael, who according to Arabs is their ancestor. But Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac to show his obedience to God. He listened, and right before he was about to sacrifice him, God intervened and stopped it. The story of Abraham is shared amongst the three faiths and is a model of the covenant between God and man. Christmas and Easter refers to the Christian holidays that celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ and his resurrection from the dead, respectively. Christmas is marked by Jesus' birth to the Virgin Mary in Bethlehem, and Easter marks his resurrection 3 days after being crucified. These are extremely popular and important holidays, and I'm sure most of you guys know them. Jesus of Joseph is explaining Jesus Christ. Jesus is the son of the Virgin Mary, and the Joseph part explains his foster father. Jesus is the central figure in Christianity, and Christians believe him to be God, and that he lived a perfect, sinless life and died for the sins of humanity, so that humanity could get to heaven. Jews do not recognize Jesus as the Messiah, and Muslims accept that Jesus was a prophet. The slashes and differing names on this entry just refers to how names are spelled across languages. Israel, as it is on the iceberg, refers to the biblical Israel. It was the land that was promised to Abraham, and Israel was the land that was reached in Exodus, the story of Moses and the desert wanderings. It could also refer to people in the descendants of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. His 12 sons then became the 12 tribes of Israel who appear in the Bible and expand out. The Bible, Torah, and Quran just simply refers to the holy books from each of these respective religions. There really is not too much that needs to be explained on this entry. The Trinity is a concept in Christianity where God is made up of three persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Broken down simply, each part of the Trinity is God and has the fullness of God, yet they are distinct from each other. For example, God the Father and God the Son, or Jesus Christ, are both fully God, yet they are distinct from each other. And God is able to be both distinct beings, as he is God and outside the laws of man, as man cannot be fully two or more things at once, like God can. The Luther protest is also related to Christianity, and is talking about how Martin Luther really started and spurred along the Protestant Reformation. He famously, or infamously, posted his thesis on the door of a church, and after a long dispute with Rome and the papacy, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. The protest occurred at an opportune time as well, because the printing press was able to print the Bible in local vernacular. The papacy faced a lot of discontent from possible corruption and more. The protest was basically the beginning of Protestantism and the formation of many, many different denominations in Christianity. The book of Revelation is the final book in the New Testament, and the story is associated with the Apostle John in Christianity. The book is filled with many popular ideas that we have today, such as the 7 seals, trumpets, a battle of good and evil, and probably most notably, the final judgment and the return of Jesus Christ. Revelation is viewed differently by many. Some view it as symbolic, and then some view it as a prophecy of what the future will hold and entail. Passover and Hanukkah, like Christmas and Easter, refers to 2 different holidays, this time in the Jewish faith. Passover celebrates the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in ancient Egypt, and comes from the book of Exodus when the angel of death literally passed over the homes of the Israelites during the 10th plague. Hanukkah is a holiday where the rededication of the Second Temple in the 2nd century BC is celebrated, and is known where a lamp was said to have stayed lit for 8 days when it only had enough oil for just one. Lucifer, the devil, and Iblis are figures of evil in Christianity and Islam. Lucifer, Satan, or the devil in Christianity is a fallen angel that rebelled along with the other angels against God. Satan is associated with temptation and leading people away from God with false sayings and evil acts. Iblis is, in Islam, a creature who refused to bow down to Adam when all angels were supposed to do so. Iblis is not a fallen angel, but a jinn, a being which we will talk about as we go further down the iceberg. But in short, they are beings created from smokeless fire and have free will and are distinct from humans. Sunni and Shia Islam are the two main branches in Islam. Sunni is the larger branch of the two and has more adherents. They split apart as a result of what beliefs were following the death of Muhammad. To be oversimple, Sunnis follow that leadership should be based on consensus of what the community chooses and the traditions of Muhammad. Shia Muslims believe in following a direct blood tie to Muhammad. In each branch, there are more ways Muslims practice and follow their religions as well. Mecca is considered the holiest city in Islam and is located in Saudi Arabia. It is said to be the birthplace of Muhammad and is the location of the Hajj, a yearly pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is supposed to make at least once in their lives if they are able to. The city is typically off limits to non-Muslims as well and is home of the Kaaba, a cube-shaped building in the Grand Mosque that Muslims pray towards. Ramadan is a Muslim holiday that takes place during the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, and it celebrates when the Quran was said to be revealed to Muhammad. It is marked by fasting from sunrise to sundown, and also more prayer and devotion shown by Muslims as well usually. Real quick, before beginning the last entry of Tier 1, I just want to say that a lot of things mentioned in Tier 1 are more general and well-known things, and I could have gotten some things wrong depending on beliefs. But I tried to summarize them in general terms the best way I could, just to get their ideas across, so I did not intend if I did get anything wrong. But anyway, for the final entry of Tier 1, we have Juan Diego. Juan Diego is associated with the appearances of the Virgin Mary in Mexico. Juan Diego was an Aztec convert to Catholicism when he was visited by the Virgin Mary. A bishop was skeptical and asked for proof, and Juan Diego asked Mary for a sign, to which she appeared and told him to get roses from a barren hill in winter. He gathered roses in his tilma or cloak, and when he went to show the bishop, the roses fell to the ground and an imprint of Mary was seen in the cloak. Juan Diego became a saint in 2002 under Pope John Paul II, and he helped to spread Catholicism to much of Latin America and Mexico. Starting Tier 2, we have Dante's Inferno. The Inferno, which is one part to the three-part Divine Comedy, explains Dante's voyage through hell with the poet Virgil. Hell is made of 9 circles, and each layer is representative of different sins, and gets worse as he ventures down. The 9 circles of hell being limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and then treachery. In the bottom of hell, Dante sees Satan, partially frozen in ice, chewing on people, like Judas Iscariot and Brutus. The whole Divine Comedy is actually really good, and I do recommend reading it. Earth being 6,000 years old refers to the concept that in some branches of mainly Christianity, the Earth is thought to be only a few thousand years old at max. It is based on literal translations and chronology of families and lines that are mentioned in the first books of the Bible. Some people go against the theory and interpret days in Genesis as not being the same 24-hour days that we experience, and which we will also talk about as we go further down as well. Adam naming the animals refers to a passage in the book of Genesis where in the Garden of Eden, God brought each animal to Adam, and then Adam named them, and that is what they were known as from there on out. The act of naming the animals, a symbol of humans being part of unified creation with all of the other creations made by God, though being on a distinct level to be able to name them, conveys authority and understanding. Jinns, which we briefly mentioned a few entries ago, refers to a concept in Islam. Jinns are beings that exist on another plane of existence, according to Islam, and were created from smokeless fire by Allah. They are beings that have free will, so therefore there are good, neutral, and evil ones that can influence humanity, even though they are said to be invisible to human sight. In Western culture, they are commonly called genies, and that is where we get the idea from. Also, jinn, and the idea of them, exist in various Middle Eastern cultures and folk tales outside of Islam. Christianized mythologies refers to the idea that certain traditions or ideas were incorporated into Christian theology when converting pagan people into the Christian faith. For example, taking pagan symbols and making them Christian, which kind of makes sense since the Christian cross was a pagan Roman idea that Christians took to represent Jesus and his crucifixion. There are other examples, like repurposed festival sites or locations, and more. The Holy Grail refers to the chalice that Jesus and his followers used during the Last Supper. From there, it came to be associated with myths and being a powerful holy relic. The most famous legend of it comes from King Arthur, or was also used to collect the blood of Christ after his crucifixion. The quest for the Grail was to bring life, health, and enlightenment. It remains a mysterious symbol and idea to this day and inspired many stories and legends about it. There are theories about the Grail and the Knights Templar and their role in the story, and the Templars are also surrounded in myth as well. Jesus and Buddha Anime is a Japanese manga and anime that depicts Jesus and Buddha as roommates that live in Tokyo while they go about their daily lives trying to keep their divinities a secret from those around them. It's a comedic series and not a serious religious or theological discussion. I don't speak Japanese and I've never seen it, but it's definitely more comedic and not meant to be taken seriously at all. Tawhid, to be very basic, is a concept in Islam that stresses the oneness of God. God is one and complete, and he's the only being worthy of worship. This concept says that there's only one God, and that it detests polytheism, demands worship to only God and nothing else, and avoids associations between God and his creations. It is thought to be an essential aspect of faith for Muslims and is fundamental for them as well. Exorcism is typically associated with Christianity, and mainly there in Catholicism, but there are other religions that deal with expelling harmful spirits from a human. Exorcism entails a belief in possession as well, which means that a demonic or harmful entity has taken over and is controlling the person. In Catholicism, it is performed by priests with permissions of bishops, and is a special prayer that expels the demon from the host. In other religions, it is accompanied by such things as praying, rituals, etc. In popular culture, they are known in movies such as, of course, The Exorcist. Historic Jesus is simply just referencing the historical aspect of Jesus Christ and his existence. The belief in historical Jesus is not as much concerned with his divinity or him being the Son of God, just that he really existed as a figure. There are aspects that are debated about his life, like how influential he really was, and the like, but majority of historians that study the subject agree he really did exist, he had followers, and was put to death on a cross. Flood myths is referencing the idea that many religions have had flood stories, not just the Abrahamic faiths. There are myth stories that come from the New World in the Americas, African legend, Asian legend, Aboriginal legend in Australia, and more. They all have in common the flood, but there are a lot of minor differing details. The book Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock talks a good deal about all the different cultures and their myths. Han Jiu Kan refers to a man who lived in China during the 1800s. He founded a quasi-Christian movement and played a significant role in the Taiping Rebellion. He claimed to have visions that told him that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, and he was to form a heavenly kingdom in China. He eventually was able to gain many followers, and then he led a rebellion to form a new egalitarian theological state in China. At first, he and his followers had success, but over time, he eventually died, and his group was defeated. The Taiping Rebellion claimed literally millions of lives, and was one of the deadliest events of the 1800s. Lilith is a figure that is not found in the Hebrew Bible, but is more so associated with rabbinic texts, Jewish folklore, and Jewish mysticism. According to some Jewish legends, she was created for Adam before Eve, and eventually was said to not obey Adam, and that she left the Garden of Eden on her own. Then, she became associated with malevolent forces, and as a seductress who would lure men. Lilith is not believed by all Jews, and is only identified in certain rabbinic texts and some stories of folklore. Accurate angels refers to the concept of biblically accurate angels and depictions of them based on how they are described in the Bible. They are usually depicted as rather scary looking, I guess would be the correct word to describe it, as they do say, "Be not afraid" multiple times. There are also different types of angels as well that are described. They are not all the cute little baby angels typically thought of. I recommend the Wendigoon video about biblically accurate angels, though I imagine many of you already saw that. 1,000 years being one God day is associated with Christianity. It comes from the book of Psalms that says, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night." The verse is taken to mean by many that time is perceived differently by humans than it is for God, though it is not agreed on by all Christians, and is taken to be poetic expression by many, as it is not seen as a definitive statement being made in that psalm. For our last entry of Tier 2, we have the 7 seals of the Apocalypse. The concept of the 7 seals comes from the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, the 7 seals are a series of seals that are opened by the Lamb of God, leading to a sequence of events that culminate in the victory of good over evil and the establishment of God's kingdom. The 7 seals are interesting and debated amongst many Christian denominations. What is said is, the first is a rider with a crown on his head and riding a white horse, taken to be Christ sometimes, and also representing spreading the gospel. Then, a rider on a red horse representing violence and war being the second seal. The third, a rider on a black horse, signifies scarcity and hardship. The fourth, a pale horse, with the rider being death himself, and of course represents death. The fifth seal is the souls of the martyrs who died for God, crying for justice. They are told to wait and rest until all the martyrs are finally called. The sixth seal is said to be disturbances, cosmic and earthly, like earthquakes and the moon turning blood red, representing the final coming of Christ. The seventh seal, the last, is the silence in heaven and is the final result of God's plan, in which good and love wins. Again, these are debated amongst many Christians, and what I provided was an extremely simple and brief overview. Maybe in the future there will be a video on these seals. Beginning Tier 3, we have Satan and the devil are not the same entity. I know a few entries ago I basically equated Satan and the devil to being the same, along with Lucifer. Also, that was the entry including the jinn, Iblis, as well. This concept says that they are two distinct entities. Satan, as depicted in the Old Testament, is more so a tempter and accuser and strays people off the path of righteousness. And the name, or more so the title of Satan, comes from Hebrew and essentially means adversary/accuser. The devil is seen as more of just a whole embodiment of evil and tempts and accuses like Satan, but also does other evil things like go against everything God stands for. The two get equated to each other a lot, and in the West they are commonly the same thing, or thought to be at least. And depending on religion or denomination, the concepts change here and there. No Snakes in Ireland refers to the story of the Catholic saint and patron saint of Ireland, St. Patrick, who drove the snakes out of Ireland when he converted the pagan Irish to Christianity in the 5th century AD. The story goes that Patrick was fasting on top of a hill for 40 days and 40 nights, when miraculously he drove the snakes of Ireland away and sent them across the sea. In many St. Patrick's Day celebrations, snakes are often mentioned a lot to this day. The Golem of Prague is a story in Jewish folklore that one day a Jewish rabbi, wanting to protect his community from persecution in Prague, decided to create a protector. Said to be from the 1500s, the rabbi, using his knowledge of Kabbalistic mysticism and the Hebrew alphabet, created a being from clay and mud known as a golem. The golem, animated by a special amulet on itself, would protect the Jews. Though some said it was too strong and a potential harm to non-Jews and Jews alike, so the rabbi, removing the amulet, deactivated the golem, and was said to store it in an attic, and it is said it laid in wait until it would be needed again someday. 613 commandments are said to be laws which are moral, religious, and ethical that Jews are supposed to live by. These commandments come from the Torah and are found in many rabbinic sources, and are also made into positive commandments and negative ones on what to do and ones on what not to do. For example, one should believe in God and one should not murder. The commandments are not explicitly in the Torah and are thought to be compiled by a Talmudic sage, Rabbi Simlai, in the 3rd century AD. Jesus' lost years refers to the fact that in the New Testament there is a gap in the documentation of Jesus' life from around his adolescence to his early adulthood. The Bible describes his birth and youth, and then also the beginnings of his public ministry, but there is a gap. There are wide arrays of theories on what Jesus could have been doing during these years, and a handful of non-canonical texts, such as the Gospel of Thomas, which does try to explain what he was doing, but Christians tend to just focus on the documented parts of his life, and not so much on the theories or non-documented portions. The 3 Secrets of Fatima refers to visions and prophecies that were revealed to 3 Portuguese children in the early 1900s in Fatima, Portugal. These apparitions are recognized by the Catholic Church and were disclosed to the public over time. The first secret was a vision of hell to the children, and Mary explained the importance of prayer and devotion to save souls from damnation. The second was Mary explaining the need for Russia to be consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of the Virgin Mary, and the need to prevent atheism from spreading in the country. The third secret was a vision of a bishop in white being killed, thought to symbolize the Pope, and was to show the need for prayer and penance to avert future disaster. The beast of the earth and the beast of the sea talks about this beast from the book of Revelation. The beast of the sea has 10 horns and 7 heads, and on the heads are written blasphemous names. It receives power and direction from a dragon that is thought to be Satan and represents tyranny, and it wants a worldly authority that is opposed to God and all that is good so that people follow it instead of Jesus. The beast of the earth is basically subservient to that of the sea and compels people to worship the sea beast. The earth beast has 2 horns like a lamb and a dragon's voice, and is representative of false prophets and strays people off the path. It is also where the mark of the beast comes from, the mark being such that, without it, people are unable to engage in economic activity and their lives are made a lot harder. Tacitus was a Roman historian that lived during the 1st century AD, and his works are valuable to historians because they allow for insight on Roman life in the 1st century and provide valuable evidence as well. His works, such as Germania, provide insight to life outside the Roman borders, along with descriptions, in other works, of its frontiers in places like Britain. Relating to this Iceberg is his work titled Annals, where it mentions Christians being persecuted under Nero and also has references to Jesus Christ and his crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. The Bethlehem star is referring to the star that was mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew that signaled the birth of Jesus Christ and was to lead the 3 wise men to the manger of Jesus. The 3 wise men went to Bethlehem from a place in the east, and upon arrival they asked, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." Dybbuk refers to something that comes from Jewish folklore and mysticism, and it basically is a spirit that clings and adheres to the living and can possess the living as well. The Dybbuk is a malevolent spirit and clings to people due to sins in the spirit's past life. The spirit, thought to be a soul that has not yet found rest, can also be exorcised from the living by a rabbi in prayers, and allows for the spirit to move on to the afterlife and finally find rest. 72 demons is a concept from Ars Goetia, a section of a grimoire or a book of magic called the Lesser Keys of Solomon. We briefly covered Goetia in my last Iceberg on medieval mysteries as well. The 72 demons are said to each have an attribute, and the Ars Goetia is focused on summoning these evil spirits. The story of these 72 demons likely also comes from occult practice and stories along with esoteric knowledge passed down until it was written in the Lesser Keys of Solomon in the 17th century. Nephilim, a very interesting topic and subject that could honestly get an entire video solely about it. Nephilim are mentioned in the book of Genesis, and there is much speculation and debate on what they are, and where they come from, and what their name means, and so on. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, it reads, "When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children to them. These were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown." The term Nephilim often translates to fallen one as well. The term sons of God is sometimes thought to be divine beings or entities, fallen angels perhaps. The Nephilim are referred to as heroes that were of old and warriors of renown, and that implies strength and significance to them. They are also, later on in the Bible, in Numbers, related to the Anakim, who were themselves said to be men of great stature and giants. Goliath, in the story of David and Goliath, is often thought to be a Nephilim by many. These are all theories, and not every Christian will agree on this. I just, of course, find the topic really interesting. Also, the stories of the Anakim and the Rephaim, along with the Nephilim, are all cool to speculate about as well. The Spear of Destiny, also touched on my last Iceberg, was said to be the spear that pierced Jesus Christ's side during his crucifixion to make sure that he was dead. The spear, wielded by Longinus, pierced his side, and blood and water poured out. Longinus was said to therefore become a Christian and worship Jesus Christ afterwards, and the Holy Lance, or the Spear of Destiny, was said to be imbued with mythical powers. Millennialism, often also associated with Christian belief as it relates to Judaism, is referring to an age of peace and justice that is marked by the coming of a Messiah. Many messianic prophecies in the Hebrew Scriptures speak of the restoration of the land of Israel, also along with the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, and the Jewish exiles coming back together. Some also believe that will be a time of global peace and the universal recognition of God. As said, though, in Western culture it is more thought of as a Christian idea about the second coming of Christ the Messiah. Cilice on the Iceberg is about Jews wearing them, but all the research I have done points it more towards Christians wearing them. They are typically hair shirts that are meant to cause discomfort and bring the wearer closer to God because it was a form of penance. It is typically associated with Christian ascetics and monks as well. It is not as common as it once was, but is still a thing, and still a thing debated by Christians too. The Book of Enoch is said to be a lost book of the Bible, but in reality it is not lost and is just a non-canonical text that was never included in the Bible because it was never meant to be part of it. Enoch, who is a great-grandfather of Noah, is mentioned in the Bible, but the book bearing his name is non-canon. The Book of Enoch has interesting things, though, like the Watchers, who are said to be a group of angels that watch over humanity. Overall, the Book of Enoch is just a non-canonical text that was never lost or included, and is a book talking about the age of the Second Temple. Online today, many will claim it was a lost book of the Bible and suppressed, but all the evidence says that's not true and was not included because it was a composite text written by more than one person, along with other reasons. Cain is still alive is talking about Cain, a son of Adam and Eve who committed the first murder when he killed his brother Abel. After the murder, he was marked by God and condemned to wander the earth. Most do not believe that he is still alive, and it is an unorthodox teaching that he is alive, but the theory just asserts that since the Bible never explicitly says, beyond Genesis, about the life of Cain, then he must still be alive wandering the earth to this day. Adam Kadmon in certain mystical traditions, often in Kabbalah, a form of Jewish mysticism that seeks to explore and understand the nature of God, creation, and the universe, and also in esoteric thought, there is a belief that Adam Kadmon is the blueprint for humanity. The name loosely translates to universal or primordial man, and he is not the Adam of Adam and Eve, but represents the highest level of the tree of life, which is a spiritual and symbolic diagram in Kabbalistic cosmology. Adam Kadmon represents or symbolizes the idealized form of humanity and embodies the divine image that humans are meant to reflect. Wrestled with God tells the story of Jacob, who in the night wrestled with a mysterious man, later revealed to be a manifestation of God. After the symbolic and literal wrestling match, where Jacob battled with fear, conflict, etc., his name is changed by God to Israel, which essentially means struggles with God or God strives, and shows a reconciliation between God and humanity. Jacob, or Israel, saw God face to face and was spared, something not said to happen. Though he asked for a blessing and he does get it, but he also gets an injury. The story is one of God and man and the struggle between the two. The burning bush is a feature in the book of Exodus, where Moses sees a manifestation of the presence of God in a burning bush. It calls him to a mission to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and to the promised land. Moses, taking off his shoes in reverence and averting his gaze from God, listens to the command, and from there on out, a huge change in his life occurs, and he becomes a leader and eventually leads the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. Ecumenical councils are gatherings of church authorities, like bishops and the like, to discuss matters relating to religion, worship, doctrine, etc. The first 7 councils are recognized by both the Catholic and the Orthodox churches, with the Oriental Orthodox recognizing fewer. Notable councils include the Council of Nicaea, which concerned the Arian controversy and the nature of God. Notably, St. Nicholas slapped Arius at the council, or was said to have slapped him. The Council of Ephesus addressed the Nestorian heresy, and the Second Nicene Council was about iconoclasm and the worship of idols. There are more councils as well, and this entry was but a very brief overview of just a few, and a video could honestly be made about all of them. The concept of the Third Temple is rooted in religious beliefs within Judaism, particularly in relation to the Messianic era and the fulfillment of prophecies. The First Temple, also known as Solomon's Temple, was built in the 10th century BC and was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. The Second Temple, rebuilt after the Babylonian exile, stood from around 516 BC until it was then destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Typically, a Third Temple is associated with the Messiah, and the building of it would coincide with that, though some Jewish groups want to rebuild it today. Samson jawbone refers to the story of Samson and the jawbone of a donkey, who was said to have struck down 1,000 men with just that jawbone. The story of Samson and his power coming from the Spirit of the Lord. Also, he is the biblical figure that is associated with having long hair and power from that as long as he does not cut it, shows that with the Spirit of the Lord, he was able to pick up a jawbone of a donkey and use it as an improvised weapon to defeat 1,000 men. He was a powerful judge of Israel renowned for his strength and also known for his interaction with the Philistines. For our final entry of Tier 3, we have Jesus relics, which is here on the iceberg twice and I presume an error, but anyway, relics of Jesus refers to relics associated with Jesus Christ. There are things such as the true cross and fragments of it that were passed all around medieval Europe and are found in churches and reliquaries after being found by the mother of Emperor Constantine, St. Helena. Other relics, such as the Holy Lance or Spear of Destiny, which we talked about, same with the Holy Grail, and also the Shroud of Turin, which was covered on the last iceberg, but to be brief about it, is said to be a shroud that covered Christ in the tomb and has a miraculous imprint of his body on the cloth. The Holy Robe, the robe said to be worn by Christ at the time of his crucifixion, and also, lastly, the Crown of Thorns. The Crown of Thorns was the crown placed on Jesus' head in the time leading up to his crucifixion, and a relic of it was housed in the Notre Dame Cathedral and was saved just in time from a fire at the cathedral back in 2019. Jesus relics and relics associated with his life and death are able to form strong spiritual connections between Jesus and Christians and are revered by many from many different denominations. Starting Tier 4, we are beginning with Zoroastrian influence. This entry is referring to the claim made by some that the religion Zoroastrianism had influence on other religions, most notably the other ones that happened to emerge in and around the Middle East as well. I'm not totally sure if there are actual connections or influence, but Zoroastrianism has two opposing forces in it, both good and evil, a savior figure type being, and an afterlife. There may be influence in some certain places, while there could be coincidental similarities in others, and there is debate which religion is older, Judaism or Zoroastrianism. So that also makes it hard to tell what influences, if any, at all, are to be found. Ask and Embla are from Norse mythology and are regarded as the first few human beings in that story. According to mythology, Odin and his two brothers, Vili and Ve, were wandering around when they came upon two trees, an ash tree, or what became Ask, and an elm tree, which became Embla. Odin created Ask, the first man, by giving him life, enabling him to move, speak, reason, etc. Odin's brothers did the same with the elm tree, and made it into the first woman, Embla. The story of this is just the first few human beings according to Norse legend, and I assume it is this far down just because it's not as much known as the other creation stories. The Satanic Verses refers to a controversial incident that could have potentially happened within Islam and tradition within the religion from the early accounts. The story goes that when Muhammad was receiving revelations on what to put in the Quran from the angel Gabriel, Satan appeared and tricked him into putting Satanic verses into the Quran. These verses were apparently praising three pagan pre-Islamic goddesses, but Muhammad realized the trickery and removed the verses. This incident is not typically believed by Muslims and is thought to be a made-up story. Jesus fish, or ichthys, is a fish-shaped symbol that is often associated with Christians and Christianity. The fish-looking symbol was said to be drawn by Christians as a way to identify themselves when Christianity was persecuted and it was illegal to be a Christian. The symbol is made up of Greek words and explained using an acronym that means Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. There is also a potential connection to New Testament stories where Jesus fed many with just a few fish as well, though I would guess this entry is about the ichthys. Mount Ararat is the Ark landing place refers to the story from the book of Genesis that describes the Great Flood and Noah's Ark. The Ark was said to come to a landing on the mountains of Ararat on the 7th month and of the 17th day of said month. Also, Mount Ararat is now located in eastern Anatolia or Turkey, and there have been a lot of studies, religious and secular, to investigate a potential landing spot for the Ark. Behemoth being a dinosaur comes from a theory from the creature that comes from the book of Job. It is described as a large and mighty being that is also a herbivore. It does sound like it could be a dinosaur as we will understand them today, but it is of course a more modern theory as dinosaurs were not really studied or known well since fairly recently, and there are a lot of theories on what it could be in reality, though dinosaurs are pretty cool. The Gospel of Judas is a Gnostic text that was found in the 1970s but not really known until the mid-2000s. Gnostic comes from Gnosticism, which is an interesting set of beliefs to say the least, and to be very brief, it has greater and lesser gods, and also Gnosis, which is knowledge and there's salvation that comes from learning secret knowledge. Anyway, the Gospel describes Judas Iscariot, the betrayer of Christ, in a different way. It shows him as being part of a divine plan, and Jesus asked Judas to betray him, facilitating the fulfillment of God's plan for salvation. This Gospel, which was thought to be written in the 2nd century AD, was never accepted as canonical text, and Christian communities largely reject what it says. The Book of Invasions is an old Irish text that explains a pseudo-historical narrative of the conquest and settlement of the island of Ireland. It contains myths, legends, genealogies, etc., and provides a mythological and largely fake story for the people of Ireland and the story of their island. The book connects the Irish people with ancient and old lineages from the biblical accounts. 9 Billion Names of God seemingly comes from a science fiction story written in the 60s by Arthur C. Clarke. The story is that Tibetan lamas in a temple use a computer to try and compile all the possible names of God. Once all the names were listed, it was thought that it would usher in the end times. The author, who worked on 2001 Space Odyssey, is well regarded among science fiction fans for his speculative and well thought out ideas. Goliath's true height is a topic that is mentioned in the story of David and Goliath, and calculations, to the best of our modern abilities, tell us what his height could potentially be. In the story, his height is said to be 6 cubits and a span, and it is well thought today that a cubit is around 1.5 feet or 45 centimeters, and a span being around 9 inches. This would make Goliath's true height around 9 feet and 9 inches tall, or 3 meters. This is also where the theories about him being a Nephilim come in as well. Jesus' date of birth is typically celebrated on Christmas, also known as December 25th, and there is no account of the actual day of birth, and over time the 25th was chosen to celebrate the birth. The year of his birth was associated to be 1 AD, though some scholars nowadays often think he was born sometime around 6 to 4 BC, and miscalculations were initially made. There is more of a focus on the spiritual significance of his birth, and not really as much on the exact moment he was born for Christians. Adamic language comes from Adam, of Adam and Eve, and though never mentioned explicitly in the Bible on what it is, there are theories on what language the two would have spoken in the Garden of Eden. To some religious beliefs, their language would have been divinely inspired and a perfect language, as well as a progenitor of all languages that were ever spoken or are spoken today. The Quell source is a theoretical source that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke draw from to describe the sayings of Jesus Christ. There are problems to some who read the accounts of Jesus' life and find a problem in the perceived differences and similarities in the accounts of the Gospels. So using this source is a way to explain these. It says that Matthew and Luke used Mark and his Gospel along with this Quell source to complete their accounts. Material found in both Matthew and Luke but not present in Mark is considered Quell source as well, and also the Quell source has never been discovered and very likely will never be because it's likely not real. Kabbalah, which was briefly mentioned already, is a mystical and esoteric or secret form of Jewish knowledge. It seeks to understand the nature of the universe and God and all of his creations. With roots dating back to the medieval period, it has many aspects, such as an aspect of God that is all-encompassing, yet unknowable and permeates throughout everything. Gematria, or assigning numbers to letters and words, believed to reveal hidden messages, also, along with a lot more. Kabbalah is an interesting subject full of seeming mystery and mysticism, along with spells, magical practices, and more. Religion for Breakfast has a good video on Jewish mysticism. How I described it was barely scratching the surface. There's a lot more to unpack, and from an outsider's perspective, there's so much to delve into. Grendel is the character from the Old English story Beowulf. Beowulf, the hero of the story, comes to the aid of the Danish king Hrothgar by defeating a monster, Grendel, who has been terrorizing the land. He is said to be descended from Cain, the first murderer, and is an evil and terrible monster. The story of Beowulf is honestly interesting, and I recommend you read it for yourself too. St. Andrew's cross is known as an X-shaped cross and different from the cross we associate Jesus Christ with being crucified on. St. Andrew, who was killed during the reign of Nero, thought himself to be unworthy to the way Christ died, so he requested a cross in a different form. The cross, which was seen by the Picts in what is now Scotland in the sky before battle, became their flag, and also made its way to the Union Jack as well. The three wise men being Zoroastrian is a theory that, again, being a theory is never mentioned explicitly in the Bible, of course, but the theory asserts that the three wise men were Zoroastrian because in the Gospels it says that they came from the east, and Zoroastrianism was a prevalent religion to the east of Bethlehem where Christ was born. There's no definitive proof of this, and it's just a theory that comes from connections being made with the surrounding areas, the geography, and history. Uriel guarding the Garden of Eden is never mentioned in the biblical texts, and the angel is only associated with it due to extra-biblical and non-canonical texts, and are typically associated with esoteric and occult and/or Gnostic beliefs. The Bible mentions a cherubim to guard the Garden of Eden, specifically the Tree of Life, and that also a flaming sword waves back and forth guarding the area too. The name Uriel roughly means light of God, so maybe the flaming sword and the angel is where the idea comes from, but the Bible never mentions a guard to the garden and only mentions the cherubim guarding the Tree of Life, not Uriel. For our last entry of Tier 4, we have St. George and the Dragon, which I saved for last because I found an interesting mystery that could potentially go along with this. But St. George and the Dragon goes that he killed a dragon to rescue a princess, and then later also St. George became a Christian martyr. The story goes that a dragon is terrorizing a town and demands maidens as tribute, but one day the king's daughter is chosen for the dragon to have. Then a Christian knight, St. George, rides into town, and upon hearing the news about the princess and the others, he is driven to act. He then fights the dragon and pierces it in the heart with his lance, and in some stories the whole town converts to Christianity. That's the story and is depicted across numerous Christian cultures, but I also find interesting, on the odd side of this theory, is that the dragon in St. George is also depicted on the coat of arms of Moscow, which was previously featured in some form on the coat of arms of the Russian Empire. Initially, I was able to find after research that was never originally St. George seemingly, and that it was added to the seal during the reign of Ivan III in the 1400s, but could be earlier from Vasily I of Moscow and not associated with St. George until the 1700s. So, no one knows who the real figure is, though it might be Vasily, but I'm not sure. So I can't really figure out why the dragon's there. The dragon is more of a Central Asian, Eurasian design, and Vasily was the first vassal of the Golden Horde, so maybe there's a connection there. but I cannot find anything else, and if you guys know anything about the story of that, I would love to hear it. I figured this out when researching why dragons are depicted so much on heraldry, and basically it leads to the Romans and Dacians, and basically ends there, and is a dead end. So, more information would be cool on a potential future video on that. Alright, sorry for the rambling, but starting tier 5, we have the Leviathan and Jörmungandr are the same thing. This theory claims that the two serpent beings from each respective religious story are actually the same. This is seemingly false, as the Leviathan in the biblical accounts is a sea creature and associated with the ocean, while Jörmungandr, a sea serpent as well, encircles the world of Midgard or the world of humans and is a child of Loki. It is said to be foretold that it will battle Thor during Ragnarok or the end of the world in Norse mythology. And other than the serpent attributes, there's seemingly not much of a connection. Unknown supreme god in Norse refers to the theory that the name implies, that there is a higher god above Odin, who is the Allfather, and above Odin there's a god that is unknown to humans. Typically though, the Norse mythology does not have a supreme god ruling, and instead there's a pantheon of multiple gods, though usually Odin, Thor, and Freya are at the top of the list. The throne of God concept is a prevalent idea in all three of the Abrahamic religions. It's used to show that God is the ultimate ruler and king, and is in charge of the entirety and of the whole of the universe. God is seen as a judge often, and from his throne in heaven he rules and passes judgment, and it's explained in a way for humans to be able to understand the power and rule of God, since typically his nature is thought to be incomprehensible to human beings. The Gospel of Barnabas is yet another non-canonical text that claims to explain the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. It is considered to be a medieval forgery though, and not written at the same time or even around the same time as Jesus Christ. It has gained some attention in Islam, as it says that Jesus was not crucified, which is something Muslims believe, but a lot of scholars of Islam as well disregard it and know it's a forgery. Likely the Gospel was written sometime in the 1500s as a fake, and no one knows who wrote it, or really for what reason. The Queen of Sheba, or Queen Sheba, is a figure in the Old Testament that was said to have visited Jerusalem and King Solomon and tested him on his wisdom, knowledge, etc. She also brought along great gifts, such as stones, spices, and more, and she was impressed with King Solomon's answers and therefore established trade with his kingdom. In the Ethiopian tradition, the two had a kid together, and from that, the Ark of the Covenant was brought back to Ethiopia, where Ethiopian Christians believe it resides to this day. The Ark represents God among the Israelites and contains the 10 Commandments written in stone that were given to Moses atop Mount Sinai. Sheba represents wealth, wisdom, learning, etc. Bad translations created unicorns refers to the King James Version of the Bible that translates the Hebrew word ram and puts it as unicorn in many instances, though likely it is better suited to mean something like a wild ox. Though the unicorn myth was around before this version or translation of the Bible was made, and the compilers just used unicorn as a concept to represent the unknown, it is very unlikely that this version created the concept of unicorns that we know today. Gog and Magog are mentioned in the Abrahamic religions as sort of figures or places or entities, etc., relating to apocalyptic thought. Gog and Magog in Hebrew are interesting, as Gog is a leader or ruler, and Magog, while less clear, seems to refer to a region or a group of people. In Islam, there are destructive forces to be unleashed, and Christianity, they are sometimes thought to represent evil in the battle of good versus evil during the end times. These two names are associated with a lot, to be honest, like there's a story of Alexander the Great building great walls to contain the forces of these two, along with many more theories. The Amalekites were mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as enemies of the ancient Israelites. In the book of Exodus, they came upon the Israelites, but as long as Moses held a staff in the air, the Israelites were to prevail in battle. Over time, they became symbols of evil against God in the Hebrew narrative, and against the Israelites as well. There is still uncertainty on who they really were and whatever became of this group of people, though. The Valley of Ants, I think, is supposed to be green here and not red, and relates to Islam, as it's mentioned in the Quran. The story goes that the Prophet Solomon was leading an army through an area, and an ant began talking to other ants and told them to hide underground to avoid being trampled by the army. Solomon, who understood and could talk to animals, smiled upon hearing this and thanked the Lord. The story represents grace, wisdom, and the Lord's will. Seven heavens is a concept found in differing religions and religious practices. In Islam, it is mentioned in the Quran, and heaven is broken into layers that the angels are able to traverse. In Jewish mysticism, the idea is also explored with different realms and dimensions being concepts. It is also found in some religions of the Near East and Gnosticism as well. In Christianity, the idea is not believed by many at all, and is generally relegated to fringe and esoteric forms. It is a symbolic idea to some, while it may be literal to others. 7 archangels refers to the belief of the 7 archangels among the religions. In Christianity, there are not 7 archangels mentioned, and for example, the Catholic Church has 3 recognized: Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, though they acknowledge other forms of angels as well. In Judaism, they are mentioned, but their names and exact numbers are often debated. And in Islam, there are the 3 earlier mentioned, plus the one of death, Azrael. In Newer Age beliefs, Gnosticism, and other beliefs, that is where you get the 7. They are Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Chamuel, Jophiel, and Zadkiel, though there can be more sometimes too in those beliefs. Vatican Secret Archives refers to the archives and the repository of the Holy See in Rome. There are numerous conspiracy theories and mysteries that surround these archives, and for numerous different reasons. Access to the archives is not secret, though it can be hard to gain access to some, though scholars, historians, and more can have access. The archives house historical documents, and the numbers and amounts of these are huge. The Da Vinci Code novel, which is not a factual book by any means, helped to popularize theories about these archives in the Vatican. Mastema, which again I think should be Jewish and not Muslim colored, so the creator may have made an innocent mistake and flipped the colors on these two, refers to a term that appears in some disputed or fake Jewish texts and also the Dead Sea Scrolls. The meaning of the term is still debated as well. It is typically associated with an accuser or adversary role, and beyond that, not much is known about it, and it is not recognized by mainstream Judaism, seemingly. The Witch of Endor is a figure that appears in the Old Testament in the first book of Samuel. The witch is sought out by King Saul of the Israelites, who God had stopped communicating to, and then Saul faced battle with the Philistines. King Saul, who previously expelled the witches from his land, disguised himself and went searching for a medium in Endor. Finding one, he summoned a vision of the prophet Samuel, and the summoning told Saul that he was going to face impending doom for disobeying the commandments of God, that he and his sons would die in the upcoming battle. The story highlights the consequences of disobeying God and searching for knowledge through evil sources. Hadiths are collections of sayings, actions, etc. about Muhammad in Islam. They are seen as second only to the Quran in authority in Islam. Judged by the actions or sayings of the hadiths, or the content of them, and also the chain of the narrators to the compilers of them, they are weighed on their supposed authenticity and reliability in Islam. They are seen as ways of guidance and a way to live according to many in Islam. Jesus' siblings refers to mentions in the Bible about supposed brothers and sisters to Christ, and unsurprisingly these are debated amongst some on what they really mean. Some interpret the passages mentioning them as being literal brothers and sisters, or some as cousins based upon the meaning of the Greek words used, though the largest bodies of Christian denominations believe in the perpetual virginity of Mary, and that the words are used more so in a way to convey closeness and not actual brothers or sisters. Qliphoth, again, is not seemingly a Muslim thing, but a Jewish thing, and relates to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. The Qliphoth is associated with the negative or impure aspects of the divine emanations known as the Sephiroth on the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. Some occult or esoteric practices view some of these sections of the Tree of Life as demonic or dark, and among some, these dark forces can be turned good through knowledge and confronting the negative aspects. Some see the Qliphoth as a dark realm never to be interacted with, while some see it as necessary in spiritual growth. God's blind spot is a theory that asserts that if God were real, then why does he allow bad things to happen to his creations? Different religions have views on why bad things happen, and it has been discussed since the beginning of religion itself, such as the consequences of the fall of man and disobeying God's orders in the Abrahamic faiths. It is essentially the argument everyone sees online: if God real, why bad thing happen? Cursing the fig tree refers to an event that happened during Jesus' life. The story takes place during Jesus' final week in Jerusalem when he approaches a fig tree, hoping to find fruit, but as it was not the season for fruit, he did not find any figs. Then he curses the tree, saying no one should eat the fruit of the tree. The next day, as Jesus and the disciples pass by the tree again, they find it withered from the roots up. The story of this tree stresses the importance of genuine faith and the need for forgiveness and prayer. 2 Enochs was a bit hard to find info on, but from what I can tell, refers to the theory that there are 2 distinct beings named Enoch. The first one coming from the Old Testament and the biblical accounts, and the second coming from the non-canonical, apocryphal Book of Enoch. That's basically the whole theory. For our final entry on Tier 5, we have the story of the Wandering Jew. The story, which is interesting, comes from the Middle Ages and tells of a Jew who was at the crucifixion of Christ. In some stories, he actively scorned Christ, and in others, He was a bystander who did nothing. After that, the story goes that Jesus cursed the Jew and gave him immortality, and that he was condemned to walk the earth until the final judgment, forever roaming the earth, never finding rest. He is often depicted as an ageless being who witnesses the rise and fall of many civilizations and empires, and he often endures hardships as well. The story has many variations and adaptations, but was relatively common throughout medieval Europe. It was a story that told of the harm that could come from the indifference one could have towards Christ, or showed the outright harm from the scorning towards God. It shows what divine punishment would potentially look like. Beginning tier 6, we have Atonism, was a mix of Egyptian religion and Abrahamic, or in this case, Judaism. Atonism was a monotheistic religion in ancient Egypt that emerged during the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten. This entry is asserting that this religion that focused solely on the sun disk god Aten was either influenced by or did influence Judaism. This religion emerged around a similar time as Judaism was thought to, or roughly around the same time, and notably Sigmund Freud drew comparisons between the two, and also the story of Moses being Pharaoh Akhenaten's follower as well. Atonism was basically gone though when Akhenaten's son came to power, who reverted back to traditional Egyptian religious belief, and scholars today debate if there are connections between the two or not. A Eruv around New York City refers to a Jewish concept called an Eruv. An Eruv is a symbolic or sometimes physical boundary that allows Jews to carry objects outside of their homes on the Sabbath. In the case of New York City, there have been multiple locations in the city where these spiritual lines have been drawn due to a relatively high number of Jews in the city. The entry seems a bit misleading as there is not a giant Eruv around the whole city, but smaller sections where they exist in specific neighborhoods. No stairs at the altar of God comes from the book of Ezekiel and reads as follows: Thou shalt not go up by steps unto my altar, lest thy nakedness be discovered. The nakedness part is often interpreted as to not want it to be discovered in the face of God because of the sin of Adam and Eve, which resulted in them hiding their nakedness with clothes and embarrassment. Also, in the surrounding verses, it also says not to chisel steps into the altar as not to defile it because it was already perfect and did not need human corruption from the Israelites. Gehenna is a valley that lies near Jerusalem. It was a place of pagan worship and sacrifice and is associated with pain and punishment symbolically. It was a valley where there was child sacrifice and the murder of children by people who worshipped pagan deities such as Moloch and Baal, and there they performed child sacrifice by burning kids alive. In the Abrahamic religions, it is often associated with hell-like conditions, and it is in each of the three religions in some form or another. Simp Solomon is referring to King Solomon and says that he was a simp for having numerous wives and concubines at his disposal. He is thought to have had 700 wives of higher royal birth and also 300 concubines. He was known to have had many wives of differing religions that contributed to his falling away from the worship of God and towards other pagan deities. Legion, from what I can tell, mostly relates to Christianity and tells an account that occurs in the Gospel of Mark. The story goes that Jesus comes across a man that is afflicted and possessed by multiple demons. He says that, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Jesus sends the demons out of the man's body and sends them into a herd of pigs, who then run into the sea and all drown. Legion is significant because it was a Roman military unit consisting of 1,000 soldiers and shows just how many demons Jesus was able to expel from the man. The fiery flying serpent is a creature that is mentioned in the book of Isaiah. These serpents are thought by many to represent the judgment and punishment towards the Israelites for disobedience. There are theories that the flying could represent the lunging of a snake, and fire being a burning feeling from venom, but it's not totally clear. But fiery flying serpents are indeed interesting to speculate about. Melchizedek being Jesus' ancestor is a speculation that the priest of God from the Old Testament, who was a king of Salem, or possibly Jerusalem, was an ancestor of Jesus Christ. Melchizedek and his priesthood is different from other Levitical priests in some ways, and is seen as above their level, sort of in a parallel, according to this theory, to Jesus. He is described as an eternal priest who blesses Abraham, and his genealogy is never mentioned as well. Jesus has genealogy connecting to figures such as David and Abraham, so this theory is drawing parallels on their possible connection. There is also no connection mentioned in the New Testament between the two, and if they are related or not. Metatron being Enoch is a theory that seemingly comes from Jewish mysticism and Jewish folklore. Metatron, who appears in the Talmud, is regarded as an angel by Jewish people. His name means essentially beyond the throne, implying a divine being or intermediary between God and man. Enoch in the Old Testament is briefly mentioned as being taken away by God, so therefore the theory is asserting that Enoch, being taken up by God, became Metatron and that they're the same being, though this again is speculative and debated within Jewish mysticism. Napoleon Antichrist refers to the connections made between the Emperor Napoleon and his seeming similarities to mentions of the Antichrist of the Bible. His military conquests were seen to be the aggressive actions by the Antichrist in the Bible, his consolidation and expansion of power as well. It also did not help that he essentially imprisoned the Pope and was not too keen on religion himself. After his defeat at Waterloo, these theories died down as expected. Marian apparitions refers to appearances and sightings or visitations that are made by the Virgin Mary. I'm not totally sure why this is so far down when we talked about the Fatima secrets in St. Juan Diego and Our Lady of Guadalupe, but there have been other sightings such as in France, the Balkans, and more. These apparitions just refer to Mary appearing to many people. The idea that giants were Neanderthals is not a super accepted theory by many at all, but it is an interesting theory nonetheless. Neanderthals were a human species that were from Europe and some parts of Asia and went extinct around 40,000 years ago. The average height for Neanderthals is thought to be nowhere near the height of giants, and they were thought to be around 5 and 5.5 feet. The theory is seemingly pretty odd, but if there is evidence of them actually being gigantic, then I would love to hear it. But all the evidence I've seen, they're pretty tiny. Isukiri refers to a Japanese story that Jesus did not actually die on the cross, but that it was actually his brother Isukiri who took his place and died for him instead. The story goes that Jesus came to Japan at around the age of 21 and studied theology. He returned to Judea around the age of 33 and was then condemned but escaped when his brother took his spot, and then Jesus trekked across Asia and Siberia to make his way back to Japan, where upon his arrival, that was actually his second coming. The story relates to the concept and theories relating to Jesus' lost years that we mentioned earlier. Sadicum Nestarum is another thing associated with Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and refers to a group that stays hidden and behind the scenes, performing divine acts and positive spiritual things. Their identity is said to be hidden from ordinary people, and that these people are more spiritually advanced and are able to bring about positive change in many ways to the world. Some also believe that these people are going to be involved in messianic events and prophecies as well. The swoon hypothesis is a hypothesis that says Jesus actually survived the crucifixion and upon being placed in the tomb was essentially revived or swooned back from the dead. The accounts of Jesus appearing after his death to the disciples, according to this theory, is not evidence of resurrection, but actually of recovery and of him being alive. Most people heavily reject this theory, as the possibility of surviving a Roman crucifixion was not likely in the slightest, and also the accounts of the spear piercing his side and blood and water rushing out, along with the sayings that Jesus asking the disciples to touch him to show he was dead, as his flesh and body were essentially ghost-like. 144,000 refers to a theory from the Book of Revelation that, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, is the literal number of people that will rule along with Christ in heaven. Most Christians view it as symbolic and representing completeness and unity, and not a literal number of the amount of people who will go to heaven. Jehovah's also believe other things, such as Jesus is Michael the Archangel, and that him and Lucifer or Satan are spirit brothers. Pre-Islamic mythology refers to myths and legends that existed in the Arabian Peninsula prior to Islam coming onto the scene. The peninsula was made up of a bunch of tribes who were largely polytheistic and separated, and also the Kaaba in Mecca was already a significant site in pre-Islamic Arabia. Beings like jinn were also talked about as well. With the advent of Islam, a lot of the mythology became remade so it would be able to fit into Islamic theology. For our final entry of Tier 6, we have the King James Bible as a bad translation. We kind of already touched on this when we covered the entry about unicorns in that translation, but this entry says a bit more. It says that this version of the Bible contains archaic language and that sometimes it changes words or meanings to boost the position of the monarchy. When this Bible was written, the language used in it was already going out of fashion, so it was old then as it is old now. There are also other claims that it is a bad translation because more source material has been discovered since the writing of this version, and some of the phrases could potentially use updating or revamping. Also, the fact that it is a Protestant Bible with books taken out compared to the Catholic Bible, for instance, does not help either. I recommend the book God's Secretaries. It's fun and describes the making of this Bible and about King James himself. Beginning Tier 7, we have Thanatos is the Pale Horseman, the Pale Horseman being one of the horsemen from the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse, which we kind of talked about. The rider of the Pale Horse is associated with death, and the passage of the Bible about him reads, "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him." Now Thanatos is a being in Greek mythology that represents the actual act of dying itself, and not death, which is Hades. The theory asserts that these are the same being, or at least have the same origin story, at least from what I could tell. Beast of the Earth, Lotan, Amato no Urichi, and Hydra, all being the same species, is an assertion that all these serpent-like creatures are the same or similar and have similar origin stories. The Beast of the Earth and the Lotan are seemingly the closest geographically, at least, as the Lotan is Canaanite, though the Hydra is Greek and is still fairly close, and the Yamato no Urichi is Japanese, so it's far. All four of these creatures are said to have many heads, but other than the number of heads, there's no real proof they are the same species, though. Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia is another thing we mentioned briefly a bit ago, and refers to how the Ark was said to have ended up in Ethiopia, according to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The Ark came to Ethiopia during the time of Solomon and of Queen Sheba's visit, and some think Sheba to be from Ethiopia as well. The Ark has not been visually confirmed to be there, and it's more so an act of faith over actual evidence that it resides in Ethiopia, and the story is guarded heavily by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Abaddon being the same as Tartarus is a theory that asserts that these two things are actually the same, and Abaddon, or Apollyon, is mentioned in the Book of Revelation and essentially is depicted as an angel or being of destruction, of force, and death. Tartarus, on the other hand, is a place of torment in Greek mythology and is said to be where some titans are housed for torment. There is seemingly little connection between the two that I could really find, though if you know more, please feel free to let me know. The forbidden fruit was not an apple, just refers to the fruit that Eve took from the tree, and says it wasn't an apple, but it was actually some other fruit. The Bible never explicitly says the fruit, and the associations with apple may have come from the Latin word for apple being malum, and the Latin word for evil also being malum as well. Different non-Western cultures have other fruits depicted, but an apple is typically associated with the tree, though sometimes there are other ones depicted, like figs, for example. Jesus learned from Buddhists is honestly a theory I cannot really find anything on. Jesus never learned under anyone according to the Gospels, and if he learned from Buddhists, then he would not have been saying things that are contrary to Buddhism. I think this is just a newer age theory that does not have seemingly any evidence to back it up, or that it relates to concepts relating to Jesus' lost years. The Divine Council is a concept in the Old Testament that depicts what we think of as a council surrounding God. There are mentions of angels surrounding God upon his throne, and images of heaven have angels near the throne as well. And in the book of Job, it depicts things relating to councils, like Satan being present and making sort of deals about Job. Divine Council just refers to the image and layout of heaven. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene is yet another non-canonical Christian text that was never included in the canonical Gospel, and also not a lost book of the Bible as we understand it either. It is typically associated with the Gnostic Gospels, as when it was discovered in Egypt in the 1800s, it contained themes associated with Gnosticism, like spiritual knowledge or gnosis. It is more discussed online nowadays, like the other non-canonical Gospels mentioned in earlier tiers. The Sword of Islam refers mainly to an expression that describes the spread of Islam, mainly focused on its early spread and its military expansions. Concepts like jihad are often also associated with this saying as well, and in the early years of Islam, it was able to expand at rapid paces and went from the Arabian Peninsula all the way to the north of Spain and further, and into places of Africa and Asia as well. Kadir, Melchizedek, and Shem are the same person, asserts that the three figures are the same and usually comes from esoteric or mystic sources in Islam and Judaism mainly. Kadir, a mysterious figure in Islamic tradition, is associated with wisdom and knowledge. Melchizedek is, as mentioned, a high priest for God with no known genealogy, and lastly Shem is a son of Noah who is often mentioned in genealogies. This theory is associated with esoteric knowledge by those who try to find hidden and symbolic meaning. Chi-Rho is a Christian symbol that uses Greek letters Chi, which is shaped like an X, and Rho, which looks like a P. Chi and Rho are the first two letters in the title of Christ and symbolize Jesus Christ. The symbol is associated with Constantine, who before the eve of battle saw this sign in the sky along with the words of, "In this sign you will conquer," and after painting the symbol on his soldiers' shields, they emerged victorious. From there on out, the symbol became common usage among Christians. Zabaniyah are things that in Islam are charged by God to carry out specific duties and actions in regards to sinners and their punishments in the afterlife. There are 19 of them mentioned who guard over hell and carry out the duties assigned to them. The word comes from Arabic and roughly means guards of hell, keepers of hell, or guards of fire. The chronovisor is a thing of legend that is said to be able to capture and display pictures of the past, allowing for its users to view specific moments or events in time. While no concrete claims or proof of its existence are out there, there is one famous story about the chronovisor. In the 1960s, a Catholic priest in Italy, Father Pellegrino Ernetti, claimed to have worked on a top-secret project that resulted in the creation of a chronovisor. It was claimed that it was used to view the past and was able to even view the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Many claim that the story was sensationalized and is false, and there are doubts about the claims of Father Pellegrino. Mithra's influence talks about how the Persian deity, which later became part of the Roman pantheon of gods and was worshipped by Roman soldiers, had an influence on the Abrahamic faiths. Mithras, who is depicted as slaying a bull, was part of the Zoroastrian pantheon, so maybe that is where the claim of connection is coming from, though there is no concrete evidence of the influence and is largely speculative, because the cult of Mithra, or Mithras in Rome, sort of existed at the same time as the emergings of Christians from the 1st to the 4th centuries AD. For our final entry of Tier 7, we have Agnostos Theos is the Hebrew god. Agnostos Theos, or literally unknown god, was the theory first theorized and put forward in the early 1900s by Edward Norden, a German historian who focused on religion. His theory comes from the messages delivered by St. Paul to the Athenians, where he ridicules them and includes ridicule based on that he found a temple for an unknown god and that they were ignorant and worshipping anything. The temple and the unknown he is referencing could have been, according to this theory, the Hebrew god, as they do not say the name of their god, and it could have been a temple for him. There are also theories that it relates to Gnosticism and a connection with Jewish mysticism and concepts that emerged in the 2nd century AD. The unknown god, being the Hebrew god, finds its roots seemingly in Jewish mysticism and or Gnosticism. Beginning Tier 8, we have Mephisto as Slender Man. Mephistopheles is a figure that appears in German folklore and notably Faust, and he is typically associated with the devil. This entry just compares him to their early 2010s creepypasta Slenderman, and this entry is likely a joke and was just added for fun. Jonah is a parody. The story of Jonah, the man who was swallowed by a large fish, or a sea creature, or a whale, after disobeying God's commands to go to a hostile city, Nineveh, and preach repentance, is a parody. While in the stomach, he repents and is spat out onto the shore, and then he goes and fulfills the commandment. The parody part, from what I can tell, is referring to claims that it is not a parable and is a real story that actually happened. There is not much more really, but there are videos and studies one can find online if searching this term. There are seemingly few online who agree on what the Book of Jonah is truly about. The devil in Zoroastrian mythology asserts that the Christian devil, as we think of it today, actually has roots in Zoroastrian mythology. Angra Mainyu, or the evil force of Zoroastrianism, is opposed to the good deity, Ahura Mazda. It is good versus evil story essentially, and that is where the assertion that it is at least inspiration for Satan comes into play. This entry is simply an oversimplification of the two and just asserts that they are the same for basically only the reason it's good versus evil. There are quite a few differences if one were to dive into the two and their stories. Sin prevents us from talking to animals refers to the fall of man, and before the fall asserts that Adam and Eve could talk to animals in the Garden of Eden. It is never explicitly mentioned if they can understand animals or not, though what I assume could maybe be connected to this are the concepts of Adam naming each animal, and also the theory of an Adamic language, or perfect progenitor language of humanity that got corrupted after sin. Jesus' wand, from what I can tell, is referencing early depictions of Jesus Christ, where he was depicted as using a wand to perform his miracles. Jesus was never explicitly said to have used a wand, but it seemingly comes from other biblical figures, such as Moses using a staff when performing miracles, and Jesus' wand just refers to early Christian art depicting him using a wand. Earth women, from what I can assume, since this term is really vague, is probably referring to the Nephilim theory. When the sons of God and the daughters of man made offspring, it resulted in the Nephilim. This theory was very vague and it was hard to find much at all about it really. Jesus lived in Britain is a theory that comes from a couple things. First, it is talking potentially about the lost years theory, which we mentioned, and how during them he went to Britain. The Book of Invasions is maybe also related to this story because of the Irish kings and nobles being descendants of biblical figures. There's also a story of Joseph of Arimathea, who was a follower of Jesus and asked Pontius Pilate if he could take the body away after the crucifixion, and was given permission. And taking the body away like that was apparently only done by family members, so there's another theory for you. He and the others took Jesus' body to a tomb, and since Joseph was wealthy, it could have been his tomb he was intended for, or so speculation goes, but there they entombed Jesus. Though the story says that Joseph traveled to Britain before, and therefore so could have Jesus, theory ends back attempting to explain how Jesus was finally entombed where he was killed. There is also mention that he traveled to Britain and also went along with Jesus there and took the Holy Grail with him, and that is where the Grail comes from in Arthurian legend as well. So Jesus living in Britain is probably related to King Arthur and his stories, though it could include other things too, and is a bit odd to piece together. The serpent's name is Zoran is talking about the serpent typically assumed to be Satan in the Garden of Eden, and how he was actually Horon, an Egyptian and Canaanite deity. There's not much I could find on this, but I found out the potential etymology of his name means essentially the deep. I don't know, so maybe hell. Also, his character is debated because some view him as a deity of agriculture and some as one of destruction, and from what I can tell, this just draws some parallels. And if you know more, please feel free to let me know. 7 bowls refers to, again, the book of Revelation, and describes bowls that are poured out by angels upon the earth. The bowls are of God's wrath upon the earth. Bowl 1, once poured, afflicts grievous sores on those with the mark of the beast. Bowl 2 turns the sea to blood, killing all the sea creatures. Bowl 3 makes rivers turn to blood. Bowl 4, the sun grows more intense, scorching people. Bowl 5 causes darkness to fall upon the kingdom of the beast, which we mentioned, causing great suffering. Bowl 6 makes the Euphrates dry up and allows the kings in the east to rise up, and spirits gather those for the battle of Armageddon, and it is to be prepared for. The last bowl, Bowl 7, causes a massive earthquake and hail to fall, with the hailstones typically assumed to weigh around 60-ish pounds. Wormwood is also something mentioned in Revelation, and it occurs when the third angel blows his trumpet and a star falls to the earth called wormwood. It fell and affected a third of the waters and made them bitter, killing those who consumed it. It seemingly symbolizes calamity and bitterness, and also in nature, the actual wormwood is a bitter-tasting plant. Kalki, being the white horseman, is a theory claiming that the Hindu deity Kalki is the horseman who represents conquering. Kalki is associated in Hindu teaching to be the final incarnation of the deity known as Vishnu, and Kalki is thought to appear in the future to bring about righteousness. There's not much else evidence I could really find linking these two concepts, to be honest, and besides Kalki also riding a horse that's white, there is seemingly not much else. Elijah, chariot of fire, is something that is found in the Old Testament, and the story says that as Elijah was walking along, a great fiery chariot appeared and carried him up into heaven in a whirlwind. The story tells of the divine and supernatural means that he was taken up to heaven with, and it is important in the Abrahamic faiths, and from what I can tell, some Christians believe it to foreshadow Jesus also. Adam and Eve's cylinder seal is a cylinder seal, which is a little cylindrical stone thing meant to hang on a string and to roll onto clay to put an image into the clay. But the seal here depicts the temptation. It depicts Satan, not as a serpent, but as a horned figure tempting Eve to eat of the tree, though Eve has a snake behind her. It was thought to depict that at least, but now is thought to depict an ancient Akkadian banquet scene, and is thought to be from around 2200 BC. The Great Chain of Being is something that comes from medieval and Renaissance era art and thought, and depicts the order and structure of the universe. It comes from Christian thought, though also Aristotelian theory, along with Neoplatonism as well. The chain has God at the top, and then the angels, humans, animals, objects, etc., all on a chain or ladder of being. It was a way to understand the order and structure of the world, typically not really thought of much anymore. It was prevalent, or seemingly so, in the days of old. For our last entry of Tier 8, we have, Sheol is an underworld, but not the same Greek underworld. This entry is, from what I can tell, just saying that they're not the same thing. Sheol is described in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament as a place where the dead reside, or an afterlife of sorts. It is a general description of the afterlife and basically mentions it being shadowy, and that's really about it. In Greek mythology, the underworld, or Hades, which is also ruled by Hades, is a place for all the dead and departed souls. It contains sections like Tartarus, or the place of torment and punishment, and Elysium, where the noble and heroic souls are to go. Also, the asphodel meadows, where most souls are to go, neither rewarded or punished. I guess the concept could sort of be compared to hell, purgatory, and heaven, though this entry is claiming that they are different, so yeah, Sheol and Hades are afterlife realms, but different. Beginning Tier 9, we have Tehom, Nu, and Abzu are the same. Tehom is a Hebrew concept that means the abyss or the deep, and describes the state of the world before creation, essentially a void. Nu is Egyptian, and is the formless chaotic waters in which the world emerged from. Last, Abzu is ancient Akkadian and Sumerian, and is the underground fresh water source, and is associated with a deity, sometimes the deity Enki, and plays a role in the creation myth as well. They are all similar with the notions of an abyss or void or waters, but they all have slight differences and tell a different story in their respective religions. Akhenaten is Moses is a theory that has been proposed by a couple scholars, but most disagree with the notion and say that they are two different people. Akhenaten was a pharaoh and father of King Tut, likely, that we mentioned a bit ago, who implemented a monotheistic cult dedicated to the sun. Moses was the person who led the Israelites out of slavery from Egypt into the desert. Other than the monotheism and the similar time frames, most believe the two to be different and not the same, and there seems to be a lack of evidence saying that they are indeed the same. Demons Stole the Names of Other Mythological Gods says that demons, mainly from Christianity, took the names of other mythological gods, and from what I can tell, it says that they took the names of pagan gods to deceive and trick the pagans into worshipping demons, or the other way around, and that they told pagans they were worshipping demons so they would come around to Christianity. Other than that, there's not much else on this theory. Rosa Bal is a shrine that is located in Jammu and Kashmir in India. The tomb or shrine is typically associated with a man named Yus Asaf, and some local traditions claim that he was actually Jesus Christ. The tradition tells of Jesus and that he survived his crucifixion and traveled to India, where he then subsequently eventually died. The story gained fame in the 18 and early 1900s and does not have real evidence to back it up, and is just a claim made by fringe Christians in India, seemingly. Melchizedek was a self-insert OC, says that the man in the Bible known as Melchizedek was actually put there by the author of the Old Testament as an original character and concept that represents the author himself. While Melchizedek has theories surrounding him, this has no real apparent evidence that I could find. Cross is inspired by the Ankh as a theory that the Christian cross and the ancient Egyptian Ankh are related to each other, and the cross comes from the Ankh. The Ankh seemingly represents immortality with a loop at the top and a cross-shaped middle section, and the Christian cross represents the crucifixion and was a real method of Roman death sentencing, and from what I can see, has no relation to the Egyptian Ankh. There seems to be no similarity besides the shapes of each other, and that the Christian belief in an eternal and everlasting God, while the Ankh is about immortality. If you have anything else about this, I would love to hear it, and your theories about it. Jesus met a family of dragons, from what I can tell, is referring to the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, in which it tells a story of Mary and Joseph along with the child Jesus fleeing King Herod and his orders to kill all babies. They stopped to rest in a cave and found out it was inhabited by a family of dragons. The story of this I found from a cracked article called 5 Real Deleted Bible Scenes, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, it's not a good read. I'm sorry. Ghouls are canon in Islam is interesting. While ghouls themselves are never explicitly mentioned in the Quran, in pre-Islamic folklore, along with some Islamic folk stories and mysticism, there are creatures resembling ghouls. They are said to guard the burial places of the dead and feed off of flesh as well. These are mainly in folklore, and from what I can tell, are not really believed by more mainline Muslims. The Book of 12 refers to the books of 12 minor prophets in the Old Testament. The 12 books are Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These stories from the 12 are different, and each tells stories, gives advice or lessons, etc. In Hebrew, they are usually one book, and in the Christian Old Testament they are broken up into 12 different ones. The 14 Holy Helpers are 14 saints that are venerated in Catholicism, and they are known for their intercessory powers. You have St. George, Blaise, Erasmus, Vitus, Christopher, Dennis, Siricius, Acacius, Eustace, Giles, Margaret, Catherine, Barbara, and Pantaleon. They are all patron saints of different things, and they will pray for you in intercessory ways, such as for headaches, for sailors, hunters, etc. They became more popular in the Middle Ages and in the middle of Europe as well. Sorry for these last 2 entries having so many names. Question of Jesus can't and did not sin refers to the Christian belief that Jesus lived a perfect and sinless life and was free from all sin all the years while he was on earth. Being God, he was not able to sin, and he could not, since he was fully divine, while also being fully human. He was without sin, so that he could be punished for the sins of mankind, and the Son of God, was crucified, and ascended 3 days later to heaven for the love of mankind. I assume the entry is questioning why he was without sin and did not sin while on this earth. Extra Quranic prophets in Islam refers to the Islamic belief that outside the Quran, there are also prophets in Islam. There are ones mentioned in Islam like David, Jesus, Job, and Muhammad, but there are also more. Extra ones like Ezekiel, Jethro, or his father, Al-Qadir, are mentioned in the Hadiths. Islam has a broader range of prophets and does them differently than the other Abrahamic religions. Multiple Satans is not something that is believed by a majority of Christians. They believe in Satan and Lucifer, but I would not say many different ones. There is mention of 8 accounts of adversaries in the Bible, though, too. From the book of Psalms, one is mentioned, and also in the book of Numbers, among more. From what I can tell, maybe this entry is referring to the idea that there are multiple demons that resulted in all the other fallen angels besides Lucifer. Other than that, I cannot really think of much, and there's not much evidence to research. Archangels and normal angels look vastly different just refers to the fact that in the study of angels, the archangels are different from all the other forms of angels that there are. Archangels are described as having different tasks and roles as other angels, such as Michael, the archangel, beating Lucifer. The other angels typically are not described as having a fixed physical form either, and perform other tasks. For our final entry of Tier 9, we have Merovingians being related to Jesus. The Merovingian dynasty was a noble and ruling dynasty that ruled the Franks in what is now, of course, France, and parts of Germany too, from the 5th to the 8th centuries AD. The theory of them being related to Jesus is interesting, as it comes from theories that they are related to him by Mary Magdalene. The theory states that Jesus was actually married to Mary Magdalene, and that the offspring the two had together ended up being the bloodline that led to the Merovingian rulers. The apostles were apparently jealous of Mary Magdalene, and after the death of Jesus, they tried writing her out of the Gospels. She apparently sensed danger and fled to Gaul or France, and eventually her kids married into the Merovingian line. Also claimed from this is that the Merovingians did not give up rule per se to the Carolingians, but instead carried on their line in secret, and it was kept secret by what became the Knights Templar. Theories like this are known from things like the Da Vinci Code and do not really have real-world evidence that is serious from what I can tell, and this is just a fake theory, but interesting nonetheless. Starting our very final tier, Tier 10, we are beginning with the outer darkness refers to other myth afterlives. The outer darkness is referred to in biblical texts and is a place without the love of God and is empty and basically a very sad and not fun place to be. It is seemingly symbolic of what it is like without God's grace and love. I guess the entry just asserts that this darkness resembles the afterlives of other mythological interpretations of afterlives. It does not really say anything specific though. Next we have Dudael. Dudael comes from the Book of Enoch and is said to be from the Book of Watchers. Azazel is an angel that came down to earth and lusted after human women, among other things as well, and after his lust and disobeying of God, he was to be bound and thrown into Dudael, which resides in a desert. The details of this place were never really mentioned, so we do not know much about this place, other than that it is mentioned as some sort of containment for an angel in a non-canonical text. Lost books just refers to all the non-canonical books that were never included in the Bible. Some were rediscovered after a while, and some claim that they were purposely left out of the Bible, but other than that, I don't think lost is the best word to describe them, just maybe non-canonical texts that were not included for a reason. I would recommend Wendigoon's video on the topic. It describes many in depth, though I'm sure many of you already saw that video. Jose Rizal, as part of the Trinity, is saying that the Filipino writer, nationalist, and revolutionary who lived in the late 1800s was part of the Holy Trinity. In conversation with a priest, he explained his religious views. God was real, that God was the origin of nature. Lastly, that he was beyond personal connection or above it. He claimed his God was different from the Catholic God, and that the more one tried to explain the concept of God, the more it seemed to him that they were speaking nonsense. His view is that God is beyond reason and comprehension. From what I can deduce, Rizal was part of nature and claimed to emanate from God and contained the Holy Spirit, so therefore it was part of the Holy Trinity. This entry is a bit odd. The tribe of Dan went to Ireland is a claim that revolves around the concept of the 12 lost tribes of Israel, a belief that the tribes migrated and went to different parts of the world. The theory comes from connections assumed by people that the name Dan appears in ancient Irish stories, and also the two share harp instrumental symbols, and there are seemingly no concrete pieces of evidence that support the lost tribes theory, and or that this tribe specifically migrated to Ireland and was lost for a while. Jesus' transfiguration refers to an event that happened in the New Testament, appearing in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a hill and shows his divinity by his clothes becoming dazzling white. Moses and Elijah also appear to the men as well. The voice of God comes down and says that Jesus is his son, and that the disciples fall to the ground in awe and are afraid, but Jesus tells them it is okay and to not be scared. I described it briefly here, but it is seen as a pivotal moment in the ministry of Jesus and confirms his divinity and that he indeed is the Son of God. Lost Hadiths refers to claims that there have been lost Hadiths that have been literally lost or possibly suppressed over the years that tell of Muhammad's life and his doings. We mentioned Hadiths earlier and their rankings from strong to weak, and many of the supposed lost ones have been said to be weak and unreliable and are not accepted. The concept of lost Hadiths is just a theory held by some about these texts. I don't have a picture for this one for reasons that are about to become obvious. Soa Rotachat is something relating to Rabbinic Judaism and the Talmud, and the seemingly bad things it says about Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary. I don't know if YouTube will let me explain this, so if you want to look at it yourself, just be warned. Alright, back to more lighthearted things. The Exodus occurred during Tutmosis' second rule. It just claims that the Exodus of the Israelites under Moses occurred at the time frame during his rule. There's lack of evidence to definitively lock down the date of the Exodus, though some believe it to be during his reign. There are theories the Exodus happened earlier than commonly thought, and also later than commonly thought. Also, some videos on the topic from people like the Lore Lodge, I recommend. Location of Ophir tells of a port or region mentioned in the Bible famous for its wealth. It was speculated if it was even real or not, though in 1946 there was a pottery shard dating to around the 8th century BC mentioning the name Ophir. The shard basically confirmed that it was a real place. The region is said to be rich in gold and wood and is mentioned relating to King Solomon. There are theories that it is somewhere in Africa and even the Philippines, though most often it is located within a region in the south of India. The Song of Songs is a book from the Old Testament that describes and celebrates the love between two people. The book also goes by the name The Song of Solomon or the Canticles of Canticles. It is a unique portion of the Old Testament and is in different form from everything else. I'm not totally sure why it is this far down, but it is interesting to read and just celebrates love between husband and wife. The Quran does not obey Zipf's law is interesting. Zipf's law is a statistical principle that shows how common and how used each word is and their rate of usage. Basically, a few words are the most common and most are rare and used sparingly in a natural language. Zipf's law, from what I can tell, says that a natural language will follow it or somewhat approximate to it. This entry says that the Quran, which Muslims believe to be the direct word of God, does not follow that law. The Quran does have words that are used more frequently than others, and it also might be a combination of the fact on how it is structured with Old Arabic, poems, etc. I cannot find definitive proof to see if it actually follows Zipf's law, but it is an interesting entry for the iceberg. Alright, for our last entry on this massive iceberg in Tier 10, we have that God is personalized. God is personalized means, from all that I can gather, that God is depicted in ways that fit the needs of the human, whether that be depicted literally as a person or depicted as human enough to comprehend. God in the concept of a god, or sometimes gods, is cross-cultural and appears everywhere. Also, a personalized God is depicted as someone with human attributes like consciousness, will, love, wisdom, and I could go on and on. Personalized could also maybe mean the concept of God was created to fit human desire and ideas as well. I don't know. This entry is seemingly pretty open-ended and can mean a lot of different things. Every culture with a god represents God in one way or another. I'll love to hear your ideas about this entry. It's pretty deep and interesting. And a good final send-off for this iceberg, I think. Alright, well, that about does it for this iceberg. I just want to say thank you for all the support. As of writing this, we have passed over 1,000 subs, and I think right now we're over 1,400, which is honestly insane that over 1,400 of you people are interested enough in these videos, and it honestly means a lot. I appreciate all the likes, comments, and subscriptions, and they all really do mean a lot to me. I know this iceberg can be controversial with religion, and I didn't intend for any disrespect to anyone. I just found the topic interesting and wanted to cover it. I know all of you know that. Again, if I got stuff wrong, please let me know. This iceberg was pretty massive, I'm not going to lie. It was going to be 2 parts, but I decided like halfway through to just make it 1. Next video will probably be shorter, or maybe not even an iceberg at all. I haven't decided yet, but yeah, that's about it. If you want to like and subscribe, that's cool. If not, that's also cool. Thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great day, and goodbye.